This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Welcome. You've heard and read the spin the media and the politicians have put on the issues of the day. To get the correct spin on what's going on in North Carolina, let's introduce you to our panel of experts. They include former representative and longtime political observer Linda Coleman, John Hood from the John Locke Foundation, Chris Fitzsimon from NC Policy Watch, and political consultant and longtime analyst Chris Sinclair. Well, it's been another interesting week at the state capitol, and we've got lots to talk about, including a compromise deal on state taxes, a 6-month checkup for our governor and legislature, and if we can get around to it, factions over fracking. Let's get started. After many months of conversation and intense give and take, Governor Pat McCrory, Senate President Pro Tem Phil Berger, and House Speaker Tom Tillis announced Monday they had reached an agreement on a tax package. Governor McCrory said, "Our tax reform plan is not just a tax cut here and there, but meaningful tax reform, historic tax reform that will spur economic development, create jobs, and put more money into the pockets of hard-working North Carolinians." Now, as you might expect, there have been positive and negative reactions to this plan, and we want our panel to give you their spin. Question one to all. How do you rate this new tax package? Is it indeed historic tax reform or just tax reduction? What's good and not so good about it? John Hood, I'll start with you.
I'll give it an A-, Tom, and I'm a tough grader. It broadens the tax base. It lowers the marginal tax rates. That is basic tax reform 101. It is also a tax reduction, and I think that it will result in a significant positive economic response. It's a good first step towards getting our fiscal house in order.
Linda Coleman, your letter grade and your assessment.
I give it an F because it is not real tax reform. It is a tax cut. It is a tax cut to the wealthy and the out-of-state corporations. It is at the expense of education, and these are the things that really drive economic prosperity for North Carolina. And for the first time, North Carolina has fallen from number 4 to number 12 in the rankings as far as the best place to do business.
Chris Sinclair.
Well, I think that in terms of tax reform, I think it's more tax change.
Your letter grade first.
It's hard to give it a grade. I think it's hard to tell how it's going to affect a lot of different people. The details, we're going to have to get through the details of it. But at the end of the day, there are winners. There are folks who will not be able to. There's still folk who will be affected. Some folks may see their taxes go up a little bit. We don't know yet. The thing is, it's hard to tell. But I think that one of the big changes, obviously, was for homeowners. There are those folks, their mortgage introduction is going to be capped, and they will see a change. They may see it go up. Their taxes go up. The question is does the rate, the marginal rate in the personal income tax, is that enough to offset those different changes? And we just don't know.
All right, Chris, we got an A-, an F, and I'm not so sure. What's your grade?
I'll give it a D. I mean, I thought I appreciated the efforts to close some of the loopholes. I didn't think nearly enough was done there. But my major objections, first of all, the governor said in the State of the State speech, basically promised it would be revenue neutral. It's going to be $647 million a year. And we can argue about whether or not there's enough revenue growth, but it's clearly not revenue neutral. That was one of the things he insisted on. They didn't do that. The second thing is some startling, I thought, the most amazing thing that happened during this whole debate, and we can get into this more later, the Fiscal Research Division, the same people who produced tax scenarios to show that most people would get a tax break, also produced scenarios at the request of others saying, what about this, what about these people, what about these people, that showed people paying a significant tax increase. A couple making $65,000 with 2 kids could pay more than $2,000 a year. A retired couple that makes $15,000 in Social Security and has a $35 company pension will pay more taxes under this plan. I don't think scenarios are the best way to analyze it, but even using those scenarios, a lot of people, not people making $1 million, a lot of middle class and lower income people are going to pay more taxes, and that's from the Fiscal Research Division. That's not mine. Those aren't my numbers.
The legislature's
own. Clear about this. When Chris talks about that married couple, that's a married couple that is almost entirely self-employment income. Okay, that's 3% of North Carolina.
Well, so 3% of North Carolina is a retired couple. There's a lot of people under the tax scenarios
that are going to pay. The vast majority of households will have a tax cut. Some will have a tax cut.
That is absolutely not true.
It's absolutely correct.
You can't take a few trees and say these trees are doing great, so the whole forest is doing great.
If you look at all the different types of households we have, you can identify some that will get tax increases, but most will get tax cuts.
That is absolutely not true. If 80%, if you look at all the households on average, if you don't take individual taxpayers, most will get get a tax increase if they make less than $80,000 a year. That's simply not true.
That is mathematically impossible.
That is not mathematically
Well, one
impossible.
of the things we're missing here, though, that is very important that we have to take is the corporate tax rate. And that's big. That's going to be big for the economy. That's going to make a difference. I think that is a huge plus for this state to get that corporate tax rate down.
There were 5 economists that testified to the Senate Finance Committee. 4 of them were senior economists in North Carolina, including Dr. Mike Walden, who's affiliated with the John Locke Foundation. You know what they told the committee? There is no consensus that cutting the corporate tax rate will create economic growth in North Carolina. That was the words of the economists, not the legislators.
Then he changed his tune because the other day he said at a meeting in front of the realtors.
I'm telling you what he said to the Finance Committee. There's no consensus. The evidence shows that it's not true.
But what he did say is it's a plus for the overall economy.
And as far as putting money into the
different.
pockets of working families, they just eliminated the earned income tax credit,
exactly
which
right.
is going to take money out of
Well,
the
plus
working
this
families.
plan, going back to the savings on the typical family. Now, the statistics that I read said a family of 4 making $40,000 a year is going to be saving $80. Of course, the average household income, according to the Census Bureau, is $44,000 a year. So that's not much help there. But if you add on the additional taxes that are going to be added for electric utilities and for going to entertainment and movies and so forth like that, it's pretty much a wash, isn't it, Linda?
I don't think it's a wash. I think it is an unfair tax burden on working families and individuals, except for the wealthy and the corporations. There was just no debate, and it should have been transparency there. There was no debate, so therefore, working families are really going to be the ones who bear the burden. And when you look at a proposed $2.4 billion tax plan revenue, over the next 5 years, that may or may not happen. If it doesn't happen, who's going to bear the responsibility of paying for that?
Now, Chris,
it's going to be us.
Chris, I know you work for the realtors, so we got to have a disclaimer there. But they thought they had a deal where the mortgage interest deduction and property tax deduction was going to be $25,000. What happened to cause it to be lowered to $20,000?
Well, I think that in the negotiations, everyone, as the governor said the other day, no one got everything they wanted. And I think that negotiations, there was compromise on all sides. So that was part of negotiations between the House and Senate. When we started out, you have to remember that everyone, pretty much from the governor on down, thought that the mortgage introduction should be removed.
Should be done away. But one of the things that did happen, John, on a good note, charitable deductions were kept as tax deductible. The refunds by nonprofits were capped at $45 million a year, which covers most all but 2 or 3 hospitals.
No, it covers all. That number is not arbitrary. That is slightly above the largest nonprofit sales tax refund, which I think is Carolina's Medical Center. So if they get more sales tax refund in subsequent year, they might bump that cap. Frankly, I don't think that was a good outcome. That was a bad outcome. They should have pulled that cap way down, because the services that nonprofits, particularly, this is mostly a hospital issue, their services are not taxable under the sales tax, so they shouldn't be getting exemptions for their business inputs.
Now, AARP wasn't real happy because the deduction for retirement income was eliminated in this. Is that going to have some repercussions come election time in 2014?
There are some retired couples, depending upon their income and the source of the level of their income and the source of their income, there may be some retired couples that receive no net tax cut and even slight tax increases under the plan, but even most retirees will get a tax cut.
All right, when we come back after these messages, we're going to do a 6-month checkup on Governor McCrory.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
Our farmers are among the most productive in the world, even while lacking a stable and reliable agriculture workforce. But the workforce problems in agriculture have reached a breaking point, and food demand continues to rise. Reforms to the immigration system can ensure that farmers have access to the workers they need. The good news is that we still have time to fix this corrosive problem. Tell your congressional representatives that we need comprehensive immigration reform in 2013.
The North Carolina Medical Society is committed to a healthier North Carolina. We feel, as an organization representing over 14,000 physicians, that we have a responsibility and an obligation to help our citizens become more healthy. And by doing this, we want to help educate them about ways in which they need to keep themselves healthy through good nutrition, exercise, and maintaining a healthy lifestyle. These ingredients will help not only individual citizens become and maintain a healthier outlook on their lives, but also help contribute to having a healthier state.
cost of everything has gone up dramatically over the last 75 years. With one exception, keeping electricity affordable. That's the power of your co-op membership. Learn more at togetherwesave.com.
North Carolina's Touchstone Energy Cooperatives, looking out for you.
We now return to NC Spin.
It's been 6 months since Pat McCrory took office as our governor, and almost as long as that the General Assembly's been in session, so it's a perfect time to have a 6-month checkup to assess how our governor and legislature are performing. Question one to all. Let's give a letter grade for how you would assess the McCrory administration to date. Tell us what you think he's done well, what needs improvement, and how you think he should proceed in the future. Chris Sinclair, I'll start with you.
Well, far be it from me to give the governor a letter grade. He's in the arena.
You're into grading, are you?
You'd be an easy teacher.
Yes. Here's what I will say about the governor. He inherited a mess, state government. He had to come in where we had broken down departments, we had overruns, we had state government was broken, as he said on the campaign trail. And he unfolded, looked under the layers and said, I've got to clean up state government. He's been working every day. His staff has been working every day since doing that. He's done things in the last 6 months for state government that our last two governors couldn't do in their combined administration.
Chris, give him a letter grade and tell us what he's done good and bad.
I think maybe a D+, C-. I like some of the rhetoric that he has talked about. I'm not sure he's lived up to fixing state government, as Chris had mentioned. He made two very specific promises during the campaign trail, or after he was elected. One, I already mentioned, revenue neutrality and tax reform. He wrote that promise. He also promised not to sign any legislation that would further restrict access to abortion services. He said last week, or a week and a half ago, he's going to sign a bill that passed the House if it passes the legislature, which clearly restricts abortion services. I think Gary Pierce of Talking Politics had an interesting commentary about the governor recently when he said he also likes to say things to people that people want to hear. He made some comments to a Wilson Times reporter, for example, not just that he waded out into the protesters' Memorial Monday, which he hadn't, but that President Obama should have granted a waiver so we could let people continue to get their unemployment. Well, President Obama can't grant the waiver, and he had said the same thing 2 days before, and his office basically apologized and said the governor misspoke. Well, the governor misspoke again.
So your grade is D+.
All
right, John Hood, what's your grade?
I'm a tough grader. I'll give him a B+. I think that what did take a while for the administration to get staffed and get running. I think it was a lot of focus on internal matters while the legislature was taking the initiative on policy issues. But McCrory has already accomplished a couple of things that I thought would be really difficult. Getting the transportation equity formula rewritten, which people have talked about for at least a dozen years, and I thought would be a heavy lift, passed with virtually no opposition. The Medicaid reform that was designed, the initiative that's beginning, he got the legislature to say go ahead with that. I think those were huge accomplishments. I do think he has still a lot he's still not fully comfortable in the suit of being governor, but I think his policy accomplishments are surprisingly good for the first 6 months.
Linda Coleman, give him a letter grade and tell us the good and the bad.
I'd give him a D+. Government is a very complex structure, and I think every governor who comes in says that they're cleaning up mess. So I think that's just the way things are. I will tell you that I think that the same thing that Chris said, when you make campaign promises, they need to mean something, because people elect you based on your past performance and what you say you will or will not do. And already he's backpedaling on the women's health issue, as well as the tax revenue neutrality. As far as leadership, I think he's leading from behind. He needs to get out in front of the legislature instead of leading from behind.
Well, Chris, I want to pose a question to you. You worked in the McCrory campaign. He said he wanted to rebrand North Carolina. News and Observer columnist Rob Christensen recently wrote that the rebranding has come more from the legislature than from McCrory. Do you agree with that assessment? Why hasn't he been more assertive with this legislature?
No, not at all. And whether you agree with the tax reform or tax change package that just went through or not, the person that brokered the deal for the tax reform package was the governor.
Well, it was Art Pope.
Well, no, it was the governor. The governor is more hands-on. This governor is more hands-on than a lot of people like to assume. He's hands-on politically, and he's hands-on from a policy standpoint. They're monitoring dozens, hundreds of pieces of legislation that come through. He has gotten in, rolled up his sleeves, and worked behind the scenes. And so the media has said, well, this governor is this, that, or the other. He's been busy doing what he said he would do.
If he was so hands-on, you think he would be talking about it more? You think he'd take more questions? You think he'd have more general press conferences? You think he'd be able to explain in detail what he's actually working on instead of, wait a minute.
Important.
No, well, I think the people in North Carolina deserve to know what the governor believes and thinks about things, not just when a bill gets to his desk. And I think he'd be able to talk about these things in more detail. I've watched McCrory 50 times talk to people, and what he does is he repeats about 10 sound bites that he got out of the campaign. And at some point, you have to start talking about details. That's why the abortion issue and others are so important, because it forces him to finally take a stand on something and not use campaign rhetoric.
Let's go back to something we talked about in the last segment. PPP, Public Policy Polling, just released a research showing that McCrory's popularity had dropped to 40%, a 5-point drop since the June poll. And these same polls show that only 34% think the governor should sign the abortion bill that the legislature is passing. 48% think he should veto it. What kind of problems does this present to him? Or are these statistics just not meaningful because a re-election is so far away, Linda?
I think it presents a very real problem for the governor, because he's caught between his budget director, Art Pope, and the legislature. And it's not what he wants to do, and that's what he's not been doing, not what people thought he would do, but rather he's taking on the positions of his budget director and the legislature.
John,
and that's
fair
a
to
problem.
say?
Wait a minute, let me get a point in there real quick. Anybody that believes
Real quick.
that the buck doesn't stop with Governor Pat McCrory and somehow stops with Art Pope fundamentally doesn't understand Pat McCrory as the governor of this state.
All right.
Period.
John, I think that most folks would agree that in recent weeks, the governor seems to have gotten his sea legs and have better footing than he had perhaps early on. Do you agree with that? And if so, tell us why.
I think he has been more public and he has been more assertive on policy matters, and I think a lot of that has to do with staffing up in administration. Remember, the last time the Republicans took over a governorship in North Carolina was in '84. And at that time, they actually had a previous governor in the 70s, and they had a number of people who had served in senior roles in the Holshouser administration that could come into the Martin administration. There was a 20-year gap between the next Republican governor, so McCrory had a lot of challenges staffing up. I think now that has been largely accomplished, he's becoming more public.
I got a couple of more questions I want to ask about this, but we got to take a break. When we come back, we'll talk more about our 6-month checkup with Governor McCrory, then we'll move over to the legislature.
NC Spin will return after these messages. We all count on our community hospitals, but funding cuts are hurting hospitals' ability to care for our families. Continued government cuts may force hospitals to eliminate vital services like emergency rooms and delivering babies. Some hospitals may even be forced to close their doors. We need healthy hospitals that are financially strong. Please contact your legislator. Help protect your community's hospital and your family.
It's true. Farming is different than it was 50 years ago. We know consumers have questions about how our food is grown today. North Carolina livestock farmers want you to know that they're using the most responsible and caring farming practices to feed our state.
ncanimalag.com. North Carolina is a great place to live, work, and raise a family, but we consistently rank in the bottom third for state health. Poor health choices and inactivity cost our state $54 billion a year, dollars that could be saved through healthier living. We can do better, North Carolina. That's why NC Spin is working with health and community organizations to launch a Healthier NC, an education campaign and challenge to live healthier lives. Join us at ahealthierNC.com.
We now return to NC Spin.
I want to continue with our 6-month checkup on Governor McCrory before we move to the legislature. Let's look at performance. McCrory said, Chris, that jobs was the #1 issue and that his goal was for North Carolina to have a lower unemployment rate than South Carolina by the end of the year. That's not going to happen. People are going to remember this in 2016.
Well, if you look at the number of jobs that have been created since he's come into office. And
I'm looking at the unemployment rate.
Right.
It ain't going to happen by December 31st.
It's going to take a little longer for the unemployment rate to come down, but we tend to do well when the economy turns back. It takes us a little longer. But if you look at certain areas of the state, the unemployment rate's coming down in the urban areas. If you look at overall his policies for what he said he would do about jobs, then he is moving the state in the right direction.
All right, Linda, the New York Times wrote a scathing editorial last week, critical of our state. McCrory responded to them saying we were staging a comeback here in North Carolina and cited the number of job announcements he'd made since he was governor. But there's a big difference between announcing jobs and lowering the unemployment rate, isn't there?
Absolutely. We are still the 5th highest in terms of unemployment in the nation. That has got to change. That has got to change for North Carolina. And the governor...
Are the people going to hold him accountable for it? I guess that's what I'm trying to get to.
Absolutely, because those people who are unemployed are not able to take care of their families and their well-being, so they can't forget it.
All right, I want to move on to the 6-month checkup on the legislature. The legislature took office in late January, looking forward to having a governor they could work with, one who wouldn't veto their legislation. At this juncture, they've pledged to produce tax reform, shrink the size of government, create new jobs for our state. Question one to all, as we did with the administration, give us your letter grade for this session of the legislature. Very quickly, tell us what you think they've done well, where they could improve. Linda, I'll start with you.
I give them an F because they are not working well together. They are too partisan, and they are getting their model legislation from ALEC, an organization who provides legislation that really does not reflect the values of North Carolina. And when they campaign on jobs, and yet we still have the 5th highest unemployment rate in North Carolina, I give them an F.
John, your letter grade, what they've done good and bad.
We've got to keep those outsiders out of North Carolina. We can't have them agitators from outside. I'd give them a B+. Again, I'm a tough grader. We've already talked about several big initiatives that have already been enacted or about to be enacted. I would add to that regulatory reform that they're about to pass. The 3rd year of regulatory reform is significant. We mentioned transportation, the tax bill. I think in a number of areas the legislature has worked well. There obviously have been difficult times. There have been bills that are controversial. There's been friction between the two chambers. I've seen that ever since I've been at the legislature, since 1989. There's been fractious
But
debate.
It's been heightened this year. You have to agree with that.
I've seen it worse.
Yeah, well, all right, I'm assuming that you're going to go along with this B+.
Yeah, don't assume. I would say I'll give them a D-. I think there are a couple things that they have done okay, but I'll talk quickly about 2 things we haven't talked about yet. One is cutting 70,000 people off unemployment, emergency federal benefits. But here's the thing: they've not only done the wrong thing, they've done it the wrong way. For goodness sakes, they used a motorcycle bill and a Sharia law bill to restrict women's rights with no notice. This has been one of the worst run legislatures in a long time.
Chris, I assume you're not going to give them a letter grade, but tell us what you think they've done good and bad.
I think that if you look back at all the things you rattled off at the beginning of this segment about what they said they would do, they've done most of those things, particularly with the tax changes and tax reform. They said they were going to do it, and they did it. So despite all of the acrimony or the back and forth, it got done. The governor stepped in, did his role. And I think that on the big issues, regulatory reform, transportation, those things that will matter, they may not matter today, but they will matter in the state, they've done a good job in that sense. Has one chamber, the Senate particularly, been a little more extreme in some things over the House? Absolutely. But I think that the balance of power between the governor and the House have brought that back into check.
All right, we're going to take a break. We'll come back, talk some more about this before we end the show.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
We all count on our community hospitals, but funding cuts are hurting hospitals' ability to care for our families. Continued government cuts may force hospitals to eliminate vital services like emergency rooms and delivering babies. Some hospitals may even be forced to close their doors. We need healthy hospitals that are financially strong. Please contact your legislator. Help protect your community's hospital and your family.
Is your business or trade organization looking for a great North Raleigh address? This beautiful, recently updated office building has 3 spacious offices perfect for law firms, accountants, agencies, and associations of any size. Our beautiful lobby boasts attractive finishes and unique Raleigh artwork. We provide ample parking and quick access to both 440 and 540 right at the corner of Falls of the Neuse and Spring Forest Road. Call us today at 919-832-1416 to schedule a tour with the owner.
We've talked about the grading of the legislature so far this session. There's a lot of heavy lifting left to do, a budget to be passed, a lot of big issues. I want to go around the table very quickly. What do you think is going to happen? When do you think they're going to adjourn, John?
Well, I hope and expect that a school choice measure will pass by the end of the session, and I think the end of the session is roughly the end of the month.
Linda?
I look forward to the governor keeping his campaign promises, and I look forward to the end of this legislative session.
Chris?
I think that they'll leave next week. They'll have a budget done. The hard part was the tax reform package.
Is that going to leave a lot of stuff on the table?
I think there'll be some things left on the table. I think reg reform, they want to get done and get out of town and do the budget, and there'll be some things left over, absolutely.
First of all, we're way past the deadline that Phil Berger said the Democrats were incompetent for not passing a budget by July 14th.
That's all right.
They control the whole government. The
for?
biggest issue that we haven't talked about yet, the biggest controversy the next 2 weeks will be voter suppression. Voter ID, a lot more than voter ID is coming out, and when the budget's going to pass. I think they're going to butt right up against the deadline for another continuing resolution. They may or may not be gone by August 1st.
So you're thinking it could be 1st of August. Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, give your feedback, read our column, visit our website, ncspin.com, or catch NC Spin on Facebook. And we hope you'll join us next week when we'll take on more issues of interest to the people of North Carolina. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.
Join us next week and get the spin on issues facing our state.